Okay, so the title of my session is The Real Story Behind the Common Core, and I think all of you who are covering this know that there are lots of myths, lots of misconceptions out there. If you believe everything you read in the blogosphere, you will think that either Bill Gates and Microsoft, or the corporations involved in ALEC, or the variety of foundations have been pulling the strings on the Common Core. You might think that Bill Ayers, a friend of President Obama, wrote the Common Core. You might even think he's got my job at Achieve if you read enough of the stories. So there's lots of myths out there. I'm going to tell you the real story, and I want you to know as I start, I was involved in the real story from the mid-1980s to today. So lots of people are connecting lots of dots, some of which don't exist, some of which shouldn't be connected. I actually know what the dots are, what the connections are. So you're getting this, if you will, from the horse's mouth. Probably shouldn't have said that. So the Common Core standards are the natural outgrowth of more than 20 years of work that states have done individually and collectively to put standards in place, right? States are the places where experimentation occurs in education and in other fields. And the way things work, right, in most domestic policy issues is states provide leadership, they try things out, they watch what other states are doing. The most frequently asked question by state policymakers on a topic is, what are other states doing on this issue and how can we learn from it? And the Common Core is a natural outgrowth of states working on their own, watching what each other is doing, finding out what's working and what's not, and trying to incorporate that into their own work. States have been the leaders of the standards movement since the 1980s. I will not go through every star and point on this, but I do want to highlight just a couple of things. One is the governors have played a particularly important role in the standards movement, starting in 1985 when NGA released a report called Time for Results. They also met several years later with President Bush at a national education summit and set national education goals. The fundamental point that they were making is that we need to raise expectations in the K-12 system for what students need to know and be able to do. In order to raise them, we need to define them. We need to figure out exactly what students are supposed to learn and have those expectations apply statewide in our states. Each state did that on its own, and the governors provided the biggest push for that. I want to point out one other star on this, which should say the American Diploma Project, which is an effort that Achieve, along with the Fordham Foundation and Education Trust, launched in the early 1980s. I will come back to that in a few slides later. But this, again, has all been a state-led effort with states learning from each other. Right now, the federal government has contributed money to the development of state standards, but they haven't contributed any content to it, and that's an important distinction. If you look back since 1990, right, the U.S. Department of Education, under then Secretary of Education Lamar Alexander, awarded grants to almost all of the 50 states to develop their own state standards. He also awarded grants to national organizations to develop national models and national standards. Every federal K-12 education law since then, Goals 2000, the Improving America Schools Act, the No Child Left Behind Act, all the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, has required states to develop standards and tests and given them money to underwrite those efforts. There were also several efforts in the first Bush administration and the Clinton administration to create national standards and national tests. In short, those didn't work out so well. Never quite got off the ground. But let's face it, if federal money, right, equated federal control over curriculum, we would have had a national curriculum since sometime around 1990, right? Instead, curriculum remains a matter of local control and local discretion. And if it wasn't, by the way, you wouldn't be reading tweets about crazy lessons in mathematics. You wouldn't have comedians joking about it, because all of those things that you've been reading about are the product of local control over education. Those were all locally developed, not developed by anybody else. So There were 50 different state standards as they were developed over the course of the 1990s. They all had common weaknesses, the most important of which is that in no state, right, by the time we got to 2000 or so, in no state were the standards that were set aligned with the knowledge and skills students needed in order to succeed, either in post-secondary education, that means get into and succeed in credit-bearing rather than remedial courses. In no states were they aligned with those expectations, nor were they aligned with the knowledge and skills that employers needed in jobs that paid well and had advancement potential, most of which required some post-secondary education. That was the major weakness, as you will hear over the course of this session. The math standards that states had adopted in the 90s were a mile wide and an inch deep. Bill Schmidt, no doubt, will talk about that in a later section. The reading standards were not particularly clear. Every year you had to find the main idea in a paragraph. No difference from 3rd grade to 9th grade in that. Okay, common weaknesses in the standards. States decided to begin to work together to address them once rather than 50 times over. In 2005, Achieve formed the American Diploma Project Network with 5 states, including Kentucky, Nevada, Massachusetts, Texas, and one other. When they did that, they worked together to define the knowledge and skills that students need in math and literacy to be college and career ready, and found out that those skills were common across states and common between college readiness and career readiness. Achieve worked with many of the states in that network to help develop their own college and career ready standards. Governors and chiefs asked us to work with them. There was a palpable interest among governors and chiefs from 2005 on in figuring out how to solve these common problems together. Achieve had developed American Diploma Project benchmarks, which defined the expectations. In 2008, we put out a report looking at what 15 states had done with their standards, how they changed their high school standards. And what we found, to coin a term, was a common core of expectations in the standards that each of those states had. There was a common set of expectations across states, and we noted that that's coming from the ground up. Right? It provided the existence proof that states could develop common standards. The Common Standards Initiative was launched in 2009. The most important thing about this, the federal government had nothing to do with it. The states worked together in agreement with each other to develop standards that they would then decide whether to adopt. Common myths, last slide. Common cause of fast federal overreach by the Obama administration. It started before the Obama administration came into office. There was no federal money, no federal control. You can argue that some of the other things that the Obama administration has done, right through Race to the Top and waivers, constitutes something of an overreach, but not on standards, right? It's quite clear that the states were starting this before the administration came in, before Race to the Top started, etc. I can tell the music's going to keep coming pretty soon, so you can read this for yourself. Anything that I didn't say, you should come and find me in the glove room or whatever that is, and I'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you.